In 2005, I owned a PS2, and I played a little game called Destroy All Humans. At the time, I remember laughing at its crass jokes, enjoying the streamlined combat, and thinking the graphics were great. I even spent some time with it post-game. Those good days are long behind me. 15 years later, THQ Nordic has released a remake of Destroy All Humans. The game is open from the beginning that its presentation may be shocking to the human eye, but behind that openness is a snark that hides how far we've come since 2005. Moreover, this disclaimer shows how little THQ bothered to help this game catch up to modern standards. From the outset, Destroy All Humans gameplay is the most basic you could find, even back in 2005. At the time, some reviews complained about the lack of mission variety, but now, 15 years later, it has not gotten much better. If anything, it's gotten much worse. That said, there are a few positives I want to lead with. For example, the gameplay, specifically the shooting, running, jumping, and so forth, is generally okay. It usually works as intended, and jumping around enemies with your jetpack feels fluid and responsive. The best example of this is the ability to skate, which is my favorite part of the game. The ability to move through the levels at high speeds while still retaining decent control was fun, only interrupted by the sporadic bullet hurled my way. Crucially, weapons like the ion detonator and disintegration ray felt great to use when you can figure out how they work. Unfortunately, some of the gameplay components are either only explained once, and briefly, or never explained at all, relegated to a handbook on the menu. Although the graphics looks pretty from afar, when you get close up, much like the game in general, it looks incredibly fake and hollow. You feel like you're staring at porcelain dolls from a B-movie. Maybe that's the whole, hey, we live in the 50s thing. But it comes off as cheap, not timely for its era. Not to mention much of the referential humor isn't from the 50s at all. If you ignore the repetitive voice lines you get from scanning people's head, which is an interesting way to get dialogue that's largely wasted by repetitive vocal lines, you get lines based on events that haven't even occurred yet. This is emblematic of a game that targets anything it can make fun of. Most of the dialogue itself is canned, and purposefully so, but has not aged well either. There are a lot of jokes about people being secretly closeted in the 50s, which isn't funny, more so a sad reminder of what society was like for so long, for so many. It's also just insulting to constantly hear characters who are obviously homophobic get read as closeted, when they might just be homophobes. Not to mention that towards the end of the game, I must have heard a slur used against folks with dwarfism, because crypto's so short, you get it, over 20 times. Part of that 50s charm Destroy All Human promises is supposed to come through the plot, if you can call it that. The crux of which being to take over planet Earth. To do this, you're tasked with traveling to parts of the US and accomplishing various missions for your boss, Orthopox 13, or Pox. The reasons given for this are as silly of a B-plot as you can get, but it's serviceable. None of the story beats themselves are particularly interesting, the only notable example being a masked person in control of an agency called Majestic. Sadly, the revelation of whom's identity is used as a way to repeat a tired trope in storytelling that comes off dated as heck. Further showing the game's age are its various stealth sections, which are linear and shallow to boot. You copy human appearances, which stuns them and makes them invisible. Just go with it, it's the least of this game's issue. But if you get caught in the wrong area for even a couple of seconds in the wrong disguise, your disguise goes away. In some cases, you may automatically fail the mission for something you have no time to recover from. This just adds to missions that often feel lackluster to begin with, and combined with sparse checkpoints, it makes for a frustrating gameplay loop at times. There were times where I felt overly punished by the game's weird difficulty spikes, especially in the final two bosses. That being said, there were other times I was pleasantly surprised. There are only 3 major boss fights to contend with, but 2 out of the 3 are a massive pain. The first boss strikes a delicate balance between making the player feel pressured but not overwhelmed. Projectiles come at you from every corner of the arena, but the boss itself is an easy target to focus on, and his lackeys don't distract too much. The final 2 bosses, on the other hand, especially if you haven't fully upgraded due to the side missions, are extremely punishing. Sadly, there are no accessibility options to help lower the difficulty when you get frustrated, which will happen often. This is an unfortunate byproduct of the main issue with Destroy All Humans. Put simply, it is a bad game with very few redeeming qualities. The game feels more like a cash grab than a faithful remaster/remake. The graphics are a poor substitute up close, which isn't helped by a barely tenable combat loop that often feels serviceable at best. The plot is almost non-existent, and oft-repeated voice lines make dialogue a chore to go through. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience recommend this game. Not to anyone who enjoyed the original, people who like aliens, people who like a funny game, or people who miss PS2 sandboxes. There are better games out there that involve aliens, funny dialogue, and a sandbox-like environment filled with lots of destruction. Try The Outer Worlds. There's a larger conversation to be had about marketing this as a, quote, remake, when it's the same game with a flawed graphics overhaul and minor UI tweaks, but that's another topic. Once again, the glory days of America aren't so glorious so much as over-glorified, so save yourself trouble and skip out on this revisit of a classic invasion. You'll be glad you did.